Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. Allyship is not often something we as men know how to do very effectively. Much of our early socialization actually teaches us to disconnect from our ability to empathize with the experience of others, making partnering quite challenging. But the current state of our political, social, and work environments have created an urgency for us to step up and be better allies. That's why I'm really excited to chat with my next guest, Ray Arata, whose work has already made a significant impact in the areas of men's work, emotional literacy, leadership, and business. His own limitations as a man, which led to failed personal and professional relationships, set him on a path to not only learn how to be a better man himself, but to teach other men how to step up as well. He personally identifies as a father, a leader, a friend, and an activist. Professionally, Ray has worked with men extensively through the Mankind Project, an organization we've talked about on the podcast before, founder of the Better Man Conference in 2016 to help men explore healthy masculinity and inclusive leadership, and has written a new book titled Showing Up: How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace. In the book, he helps male leaders and their organizations explore heart-centered leadership, healthy masculinity, and what it takes to be a true ally in the workplace. I'm really grateful this heavy hitter agreed to join us in the New Masculine, so let's welcome him in and learn more from this man and the playbook he has created to help us move forward. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I just feel really grateful that someone of your sort of like stature in the men's world, men's movement, has agreed to be with us on this episode.
It comes with the territory. It's like I look at these opportunities as, and that's exactly what they are, to further the message and to get more men on board and anybody who doesn't identify as a man to understand that there's more better guys out there than we think. We just need to activate them.
That is so true. Yeah, I think that's something I thought starting this podcast that I would have a hard time finding those kinds of men. And what I keep finding, the more and more I just kind of dive in and start looking for them, there's actually a lot of us out there. It's just how do we activate us? How do we gather together so that we're not just sort of isolated, alone little islands out there in the world, but then we can actually create this as a movement.
You know, my in the beginning of my book, there's two italicized questions that I pose to the reader, and that's like, why should I care about gender equality, gender equity, and everything else, and why should I change now? And it really gets men to think. But before that, I pose that most men do care, but why is it that so few men are stepping up? And it's because we're not feeling the pain and we're not made aware. So what this whole idea of like coming onto a podcast, and a lot of the work I do is to meet the majority men, because right now the spotlight's on them from Time's Up, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and COVID. So they can decide, do they want to be part of the minority that controls the narrative, those bad apples, or do they want to be part of something bigger? So if we do our job right and we meet them where they're at, it's an inspirational and educational endeavor.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I agree that many of us as men have the privilege of not experiencing some of that tension that's in the world, or some of the places where there's lacking fairness and lacking justice in different areas. And so it is oftentimes through pain that we meet those places. And I'm curious to know, as we get into this, a little bit about your own story as a man, to find out what kind of woke you up to this, what activated you into this. And so let's start by just checking in on what are some of the stories that come to mind for you when you think about what you learned about being a man growing up in this culture?
Yeah. So what my first influence of learning about what it meant to be a man was my father. My father, still alive. He's a retired judge. He was an athlete. He was a provider. He was a partner. And so it's interesting there's what we learn about being a man that's healthy, and there's what we learn about being a man that's unhealthy. And so for the most part, I saw my dad as this rock solid patriarchal provider. And early on, when I was in my, I think I was 12 or 13 years old, he got in a bad car accident. Unbeknownst to me, he made a commitment to himself and God that he wanted to work for the people. So he left his job of a personal injury attorney and decided at 37 years of age to become a judge. And Ronald Reagan was the governor of California then, and appointed my dad. My dad's father, my grandfather, Ray Sr., was a judge. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that's who I followed in terms of stepping into service. And my mom has the same thing. So seeing that really shaped me. And then I went to an all-boys Jesuit high school. And so there was unhealthy masculinity all over the place. And I was into basketball. And the irony for me was, I remember the conflict. I was really curious about theater, and I wanted to be involved. But, if I ever had any kind of homophobia whatsoever, or not even homophobia, it was really more fear of being labeled as such, as a white cisgendered heterosexual guy, and all the heat that I would have taken from my jock friends. I got as far as being an usher in the play. So I was next to it. I was part of it. So I had to work all that through, and actually I ended up being in a play 8 or 9 years ago. But that was the kind of stuff that kind of impressed upon me. Throw in an uncle and a grandfather here and there. But that was the stuff that really influenced me initially around my manhood.
It's amazing how many of those things, what a common experience that is for us as men, that threatening our sexuality or our feminizing us is the way that we sort of keep each other in check, keep each other in that man box, so that we don't stretch out and lean into something we might be really enjoying, like theater. How heaven forbid you actually enjoy yourself. And so you relegate yourself to being theater adjacent and being an usher and just taking it in passively rather than actually being able to engage in it.
Yeah. And it's, the word flamboyance for me when I was younger had a negative connotation. And now, as I become more at peace with myself, especially with my gay male friends, I can totally go there. And it feels good.
It does feel really good, right? To let that, just let it go.
Totally. I just let it go.
This whole fascination we all have with as men of being really stoic and non-expressive. It's it's so boring and so
bullshit.
Yeah, it's such bullshit. Yeah. So how does that show up for you when you allow yourself to kind of lean into the flamboyance?
I'm playful. My tonality changes. The strain and effort to be strong and masculine goes away. It's a release. It's a release for me.
It's a release, yeah. Which just points out to how much we're unknowingly, because we're so used to it, how much rigidity we hold all the time and how much tension we hold all the time, just trying to present as something. And when you get that release, when you get that permission from maybe the gay men in your life, the men who have already broken some of the rules of our man box, when you get that permission to just kind of sink into who you really are and to release that sort of presentation of self, it's great.
I've come across many a flamboyant gay man, and then there's been times where there's one cisgendered heterosexual buddy of mine where I think the same is true for him, but we let it rip sometimes, and I watch myself going, where's that coming from? And I'm like, oh, I guess that's a part of me. Right? Feels kind of good, you know? So anyway, it's just it's interesting that we're going down this path. I thought we would have, but it is what it is. So
me neither. I think it's the balance of a cisgender heterosexual white man and a gay cisgender white man. Also, there's something in those sort of like gay male straight male relationships that actually have been really healing for both sides. I think in previous conversations you've talked to me about some of your work at the Mankind Project, and I know the Mankind Project does put some focus on sort of playing with the power dynamics of who's leading at different times in terms of gay male or queer led spaces versus heterosexual spaces. And then there's mentorship that goes on. Can you tell me a little bit about what that has been like for you in playing in a men's work field and sort of navigating relationships with queer men?
So the Mankind Project over the last several years has had what we call gateway weekends. And so for men identifying other than straight, cisgendered, there's a space for them. And the weekend takes on a different flavor, but sticks to the core concepts of initiation, right? And I have not been on one of those, and in the context of my own leadership path, I've done like 55 weekends and I've gone into Folsom Prison. But it's routine and encouraged that if you are going to step on the path of leadership, initially you declare your leadership path, you become a leader in training, and then you become a co-leader candidate. And you have to go through hot seats and there's these hurdles, and in order to be blessed to go further. And along the way, it's encouraged that you have a mentor. And so after the third gay man asked me to be a mentor to him, I realized, oh, this is interesting. One, the assumption I made is I'm probably safe to them. But the other piece was surprising that I realized was that they each had their own stuff to work out around alpha male cisgendered, straight guys. And it was a great place for us to interact and work with each other. So we taught each other, truth be told.
It's been my experience of gay male and straight male relationships is there's often a healing that can go back and forth, whereas like sort of we as gay men or queer men, non-straight identifying, we have already broken some of the rules of the man box, and so we can give permission to straight men to continue doing that work themselves. But then also for us in the other direction, we get to work in a safe container with a man who's doing his work. We get a straight man that's doing his work. We get to heal and repattern some of our wounding around masculinity. And so I think it's interesting. You were saying initially you thought it's because they felt safe with you, but the other option is because they don't feel safe with you and they need to work on that.
Exactly. And then watching like, oh, am I about to impose my heteronormative ways of being a leader on them? No, stop. Being a warrior, strong warrior like man doesn't mean you need to be big and strong. And I've witnessed plenty of very strong gay male leaders that would scare me. Like good scary, right? And so if they're going to step up and lead a container of, heteronormative and non-heteronormative men, you've got to find the middle line in the context of masculinity that everyone's going to respect. So even the gay men that are on their journey and they're kind of either hiding behind the rock or they haven't done their healing, they're still going to want to aspire to that in their own way. Right. And so fascinating stuff. And I'm still learning.
Well, I appreciate that you've done some of that work and you've been so conscious in that, because I think there is that opportunity for healing to happen, but it's also an opportunity where it could retrench old patterns of sort of power differentials between the cisgender heterosexual white man and then the queer people or the people of color, or the where it could continue to re-entrench those patterns of power disenfranchisement. So I appreciate that you went in consciously looking for that middle line in those spaces.
Yeah. And then the one step further is how can I use this? Bridges over into the work that I do. It's about decentering myself.
Yes.
And using my position, power, platform, and privileges to center others.
Oof.
That is what I've been working on lately. And so, when I do the Better Man Conference in November, we're going to do 1 day mutually live conferences in New York and San Francisco, half of the facilitators in each location, streaming to a screen at each location and streaming virtually. And I'm going to hold the stage in San Francisco, and Jennifer Brown, a gay cisgendered white woman, is going to hold the stage there. And so I'm already thinking, okay, yes, I'm the founder of the Better Man Conference. Yes, I'm going to be the quasi-MC, but where can I, how can I, when can I decenter? Now, I have to do some work on recentering myself, because Eduardo Placer, our past MC, who's in head of dramaturgy, he's a gay Cuban man, and he called me out and he said, Ray, you centered yourself out of the equation. Come back. This is your conference. Uh-huh. So I'm like, okay, got it. So there's a balance.
Yeah, swung the pendulum a little too far, huh? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this concept of decentering self, and I want to, before we jump in even deeper into the work and how that shows up in the work that you're creating and the playbook that you've kind of given us as men, I want to find out what that decentering process has been for you in your own personal life. I know there were some sort of wake up calls that you had that kind of put you on this path. Would you be willing up for describing kind of what happened in your own life?
Wake up call? Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back in time to 1999. I'm 2 months into living in the brand new house that my then wife and mother of my 3 children built. And at 1:00 in the morning, I asked a question that I did not know the answer to. I violated the rule my dad told me: don't ask a question unless you know the answer to it. Kind of a lawyer thing. And she basically said, things aren't right. And, I haven't been happy for a long time, and I've been trying to tell you, and I don't love you anymore. And ouch. Neither one of us knew what to do. And then 6 weeks later, one of my business partners, I had a consulting practice in the financial services business for retirement plan consulting in Silicon Valley to high-tech firms and law firms. And he got up in the middle of the night and went to another firm. He's a friend of mine. So it was a betrayal. So now this guy's going to try and steal our accounts and bring them to another firm, threatening my livelihood.
Double ouch.
So double ouch, 1-2 punch, right? And so I didn't know what to do. So I did what most men do when they don't have emotional literacy training. I stuffed it. 6 months go by, and I have an outburst at work where I called the syndicate desk, and they called back my manager, and he called me and said, Ray, man, sometimes you act so out of control. What the fuck? Not cool. And the other partner said, Ray, sometimes you act with a sense of entitlement. I'm like, okay, I've kind of heard this before. I need to go talk to my manager. I said, hey, Chris, thanks for telling me that. It really landed, and it kind of sounded familiar to the feedback I've got from my wife. I need to do something. He goes, close the door. And I sit down, he hands me a brochure, and it says Mankind Project New Warrior Weekend. Now, this is in the financial services industry of all places, an emotionally literate manager and a cowboy wild west financial services, full-blown toxic masculinity. And I said, what the fuck is this? And he said, changed my life. Can't tell you what goes on there, but here, call my wife. So on trust, I called and set it up. And I went and did this weekend, and it was my journey of into healthy manhood that had me see how the pained little boy in me was driving the adult bus. And my deep core wound was I'm not lovable. Now I got to that later, but the piece of work I did on the weekend was about getting my balls back from my mom. Good little boys don't want to upset mommy. And I being the oldest was just like that. And I went out and I'd go out and I'd seek women, same or opposite as my mother. And so all that shit played out, in my first marriage. And so when I had that breakthrough, I understood accountability. I understood truth. I began to understand my emotional literacy. And off the heels of the weekend, I went and joined a men's group, which I now refer to as the Emotional Gymnasium. And next thing I know, I'm having cups of coffee with men, and they're like, "Hey, you said something," and it's just I started staffing the weekends, and then I was on leader path, and then it became clear to me, Ray, this is your path. But I was still working in the financial services business until I hit the eject button, and I started coaching. And then I met a diversity and inclusion consultant, a woman who said, "Ray, you really have something here," because I was almost done with my first book called Wake Up, Man Up, Step Up, Transforming Your Wake-Up Call to Emotional Health and Happiness. It's on Amazon, just like Showing Up. It's a great non-workbook for men. It's very evergreenable for men to read because it meets them where they are, especially since most men won't change unless there's some form of pain. So it meets them right where they're at. And she suggested I go to a women's leadership conference and just listen, but I'd probably be the only male there, which was all true. And that's when it hit me. Man in the mirror moment number 2. Now I get what my mom was saying, being second born in an Italian family. All the rights and privileges went to her older brother because he was a boy. Then I'm like, crap, my wife is oldest of 7 kids, and her youngest brother is at the helm of the real estate business. And then I thought about my daughter, who's going to be graduating with a degree in computer science. So I'm like, someone needs to do something. Someone needs to do something. Maybe that someone's me. And after talking to 10 or 12 audiences of all women at women's leadership conferences, I'm like, I'm going to put together a conference that's going to advance healthy masculinity into the leadership conversation. I called up some corporate folks and said, "This is what I want to do. Will you back me?" And they said yes. And when I was in New York at Michael Kimmel's International Masculinities Conference, I didn't realize this until very recently, but knowing that Sheryl Sandberg was in backstage, Gloria Steinem and Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, the filmmaker, I walked my ass back there. I walked right as if I owned the joint. And I now realize, because you're 6'3 plus, you're white, you're cisgendered, you just used your privileges to walk right in there. And I introduced myself to them, and they become supportive colleagues. Not Gloria. I never met her. And so that's what had me launch the Better Man Conference. So here we are. This was all pre-Time's Up, Me Too. So 14 conferences later, 6 years later, the timing is divine because the perfect storm that resulted is shining a light on the majority, men. And so now more men are saying, "What do I do, Ray?" Companies are saying, "Ray, how do I engage them?" And then people who come from historically marginalized groups both want to support and be supported. So that's the mix of audience that I speak to in the book, Showing Up book, and that show up at the conference. And so now my life looks like keynote speaking, trainings, facilitated conversations, and the big surprise, which is not a surprise, is a lot of women of color and women are calling me up to go in and speak to their white male executives because they see that I have an ability with heart and compassion to not judge them and to meet them where they're at and help them get off their duffs, and show up.
I would imagine also it comes from a place of like women of color, women in general have been doing a lot of this emotional labor for a long time anyways. And so one of the things I love to really encourage men is to let's take ownership of our own work, our own emotional labor. Let's do that with each other. Let's stop relying on the women to do this for us, the women in our lives or the queer people or the people of color to do all of that. Because there's a lot on their plates that they're working on. And we need to be really stepping forward and challenging each other in heart-centered ways to actually call each other in and like, let's step up, rather than to continue to play these games that are toxic. And as you experience in your own life, where you're eventually going to get those 1-2 punches that are just going to knock you down.
Yeah.
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 It's the natural evolution of life is that if you keep stuffing, if you keep trying to avoid something, life will just put it right in your face.
What you resist will persist.
For sure.
Or, if you lead with your chin, you can expect that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Well, I think it's really a powerful story to hear of a man that lost two of the most significant things in a man's life, being like the male partner to somebody, and then also losing a business partner at the same time. To hear a man that's lost those things, and to have such a huge ego hit in those moments, to actually finally learn how to transform that and turn that into a mission to create positive impact in the world, rather than to keep re-entrenching and getting worse and getting more angry about the world and more stuffing even more. Like, you learn that process of transformation that allows you to actually have an impact in a positive way out there in the world.
That's well put. It didn't feel that way in the beginning.
I'm sure it didn't.
It was a matter of survival.
Yeah.
Like, as in, I never want to go back to sleep again.
Uh-huh.
That hurt a lot. Pain was my motivator.
Yeah.
And then, the momentum continues, and the surprise to me, gender equality, I didn't know what that was. I mean, I kind of thought I did, but, I guess all this was preordained. And then once I was in it, I realized I was in it for the long haul. There you go.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I love to make sure that we also, like, we see a lot of elements of men continuing to use their power in really destructive ways, or in continuing to perpetuate the system where there's a disenfranchisement for a lot of people. And so I appreciate you sharing your story, because I think it is important for us to know that there is a pathway through to not be already on that journey, already be perfect in that way, and to be able to learn along the way and to step further and further into a powerful mission that helps to change the landscape for everyone. So you started the Better Man Conference in 2016. Was that the first sort of step in your men's work and the stuff that you're leading in your own kind of business?
So I would say that yes, it was my first foray that fed the activist in me to do something. I mean, it came into my being, and I decided to go for it. And I reached out to Michael Kimmel, a well-known author. I reached out to Rachel Thomas, the president of Lean In. Cheryl connected me to her. I reached out to Don McPherson, a Black retired NFL quarterback, and several others to come onto the stage and co-curate an experience for everyone to learn. I even had the head of UN Women California there. And so that was my first foray. And it went so well, then that kind of put me on the map, per se.
Mm-hmm. And so what is that, if somebody was to attend the Better Man Conference, what is that experience like? What would they expect from it?
So what people have said, the people who don't identify as men, the common thing that comes out of their mouth is, "Oh my God, I had no idea men could be vulnerable. Men could share their emotions. I had no idea." They're in awe. Mm-hmm. The men that come have some transformation go on. Like they're free. They're able to learn amongst peers. It's safe. And so those are some of the things they say. My goal in the conferences is to inspire and get people to think, feel, and act differently. So I realized when I decided to do this is I know how to create a safe space, and that starts with me going first. Mm-hmm. So I usually kick off the conference, and I go there. I go first vulnerably, and I share some stuff. And I got good counsel early on to really maintain a commitment to intersectionality. And since it was bigger than me, and it wasn't about having a bunch of white people on the stage, it was about having everyone coming to see a little bit of themselves across the board with respect to who was up there. We would, there's no shortage of topics that we could focus on. And every year I'd come up with a theme that we would tackle and then we'd curate around, and it kept evolving. We have something called the Allies Journey, which has 4 steps that have driven the conference that are in the book that I do my keynotes. And the first one is acknowledge your stuff. Well, what's your stuff? Your bias, your privilege, your emotions in the man box. So that's contextualized as awareness. Step 2, listen with empathy and compassion. That opens up the door to the lived experiences of others. 3, take responsibility for your impact and bias, and when necessary, clean it up. And step 4, commit to new actions and behaviors. So last year, we did one conference, all virtual, for each step. In the past, we would cover all 4 steps in a conference. And this year, the theme, we're going to do one conference, but we're going to focus on the 3 P's: power, patriarchy, and privilege. We're going to dismantle the patriarchy or look at positive patriarchy. I'm right in the midst of writing the blog and what the hell that means. And we're going to change our relationship to power, and we're going to look at how we can use privilege. So one of the cool things, there's a blessing to be a leader and there's a burden. I shoulder a tremendous amount of responsibility, but the blessing is I get to think of this stuff up and put it out there, which, feels good. And I can ask for help and support, fly right in the face of the man box, and get an experience of feeling supported and relief and less stress.
Yeah. So what made you go from leading a conference about these principles and about these 4 steps of the Allies Journey? What led you to actually turning that into a book and actually writing this book, that Showing Up?
So when I wrote my first book, this guy, David Fabricius, said, Ray, you're playing a one-to-one game and you need to be playing a one-to-many game. And I had been working with men for a long time, and I went running when I shouldn't have, because I had osteoarthritis in my hips, and in the middle of nowhere was this little tiny stone that was sticking out of the dirt. And when I landed on it, I broke my 5th metatarsal. And the doctor told me I couldn't run, couldn't do anything for 10 weeks. And a little voice in my head said, now it's time to write that book. So I wrote that book because all of it was in here in my head, and I needed to get it out in order because I had been coaching and working with men and doing the men's weekends. So it's very similar to the first book. When this came around, I had been on a steep learning curve that I put myself on once I started the Better Man Conference. So imagine 4 or 5 years of doing that, trainings, gazillion conversations with DEI professionals and all sorts of men, and my head was full again. And when COVID hit, I'm like, I'm going to write this book now. It's time. So I hired a book coach, and then another one, and I just, my buddy Mike Robbins, who's a fellow MKP guy, international keynote speaker, he connected me to his agent. And his agent, I put together a proposal, and she really liked it. She talked to me, and she signed me. And then she pitched me to publishers, and then the publisher came on board, and this was big time. I was in the big leagues, so to speak.
Yeah.
It wasn't Random House or anything like that, but be that as it may, it was legit. And so I basically put myself into boot camp, and every day, Monday through Friday, from like 8 till 12, 8 till 1 o'clock, I'd write, and then I'd coach for 2 hours, and then I'd ride my bike, and I'd wake up and I'd do it again. And then, then there's the editing process and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the promoting process, and then it just keeps going and going.
Yeah, I'm always impressed by people that commit themselves to a book. I have seen enough of the people in my life who have published books and what a process that is, and the arduous process that can be, all the different steps of it. So I'm always impressed when somebody gets it out there and gets it completed. It sounds really interesting to me that I think this was true for a lot of people, like the sort of COVID coming down and the pandemic hitting and us sheltering in place. There became this opportunity for us to say yes to the thing we had been putting off for a long time. Because we were just in the consistent rat race of everything of our lives and the consistent habitual patterns. And when a big disruptor comes in like that, you have a choice to either create with it, to heal in it, to struggle in it. And sometimes it's not a choice based on our intersectionality, as you were saying. But it sounds like you had a moment of going, okay, this is the permission I needed to actually put this down into a book.
Yeah, I was ready.
Yeah, I
I
hear
was
that.
ready. I mean, you have to be ready to do it,
Uh-huh.
and knowing what that means.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
And I had that prior experience, and so I know I'll be writing another one. I'm not sure yet what it's going to be.
Uh-huh. Yeah. One of the big things I really appreciated in the early parts of the book as I was reading it that you talk about and you've sort of alluded to here was the concept of power, the power being the elephant in the room of why we as men are not changing, why we're not stepping into ally roles, why we aren't being better men is because of this thing of power. Can you speak a little bit more about what you mean when you say that power is the elephant in the room in this journey?
It's nice to be in charge. It's nice to call the shots. It's nice to not have to report to anybody. There's a certain liberation in that. But the flip side of that coin is that there's a responsibility to it. There's a temptation to misuse it. There's a temptation to be unconscious around those that don't have it, how that unconsciously influences them. And so, looking at power differential, a lot of guys don't realize, like at work, if they have a hierarchical difference between somebody else and they enter into a relationship, it never occurs to those individuals that this person is damned if they do, damned if they don't. And even when I say that to them, they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, okay, let's switch roles. And I think I wrote about this, maybe I did in my book, I can't remember. Imagine if you're reporting to a woman and she comes on to you and she wants to go out with you. There's a part of you that wants to keep your job. But so you don't want to say no, but she's not attractive either or whatever. You don't want to say yes. You're fucked.
Mm-hmm.
That's why those that have power need to stay away from that sandbox and not go there.
Yeah, I think it's important as we've had cultural conversations around consent, that even if someone says yes, noticing that there might be a power differential that's influencing that yes, and that it's not true real consent.
Yeah, and even though I don't hear about same-sex power differential, I would imagine that it would exist
for sure.
And the discomfort, if I was at not me, but a man was at the affect of a male leader exercising, what does he do then?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So discomfort's discomfort. Not having any choice amidst the power differential is not having any choice.
Yeah.
And the person who has the power, if they're not aware of it, that's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And it feels like a lot of men are being, as you've said, sort of the Time's Up, the Me Too, Black Lives Matter. As things have been sort of put in our faces, it seems like a lot of men are reacting to the fact that they feel that discomfort, that they feel that now with this being brought to light, it almost feels like they don't have any choices and they're kind of afraid to move or to take a step in any direction because they might get it wrong. And so there is this sort of reactivity as men feel a little bit of the squeeze, a little bit of the tension, because these conversations are brought out into the light.
Yeah. So in my book and in a lot of my keynotes and my trainings, I show a slide. It's a pyramid of the 5 states of men that exist in most orgs. There's a category of men that feel threatened that DEI initiatives threaten their job. Underscore the word "their," because they believe that it's their right to have that job, and that's their unexamined privilege right out there in the open for everyone to see.
Hold for a second. And as you're talking about DE&I want to make sure that we're just being clear that that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's a sort of big field that's in corporate America and a lot of different places around looking at privilege, looking at bias, looking at inequities in the workplace. And it's most often or traditionally been led by women and gay men
or
sometimes.
People of color,
or people of color. And so you're actually kind of one of the unique people, being the cisgender heterosexual white man that's in that space. And it's interesting. I'm sure you navigate a lot of interesting elements to be like, oh, great, another white man has taken over our jobs. But we also need you to be in those spaces. And so I just want to make sure we're being clear, because not everybody knows what DE&I is. But keep going. Yes, you're talking about the 5 different layers of men that exist in.
Yeah, so in that threatened category, there's also an emerging category of white men who believe that all this attention on white men over the last 12 to 18 months is a distraction. Again, that's their unexamined privilege. Michael Kimmel, I love his line, "Privilege is invisible to those who have it." Mm-hmm. And with respect to privilege, to me, it's akin to advantage, and I seek to humanize it as opposed to demonize it. And so those very same practitioners in the diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces now look at me completely differently, because they could sing to the cows come home to the white male executives, but they won't hear it. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting a lot of requests to come in because I look like them and sound like them to preach the same message.
Well, it's the opposite of the power thing we were talking about, where the power is the problem, and now you're using power and your privilege to actually be the solution. And so it flips the power on it and creates a solution.
I've been accused of being a white man whisperer. A woman of color called me that once, and
thank goodness that exists in the world. People like you, my goodness.
Yeah. So that's just the bottom rung. The next one are those that articulate. There's a ERG, Employee Resource Group, or BRG, Business Resource Group, for LGBTQIA, people of color, Latinx, Asian. But what about us? What about us guys? And I like that group because they're in the temporary pain of exclusion, which means they're convertible. Mm-hmm. The biggest group are the ones that are afraid to say or do the wrong thing. So they do nothing, which signals complicity. And that opens up the door for me to work with these guys to change their relationship with fear, to breathe into it and allow them to bring themselves to high alert and to keep going, which allows for a deeper exploration of, do you want to act from your white male fragility or from your male fragility? Or do you want to step into your white male or your male ability, which I focus on the dynamic duo of allyship, the 2 superpowers of vulnerability and accountability. So throw privilege in there because that's what's needed. And then the last 2 categories are the uncertain, the ones that want to do the right thing, but they don't know what to do. And then the last group, the allies in training, but there's far too few of them. So knowing that those groups exist inside most organizations is educational for the men and for anybody in an org, as well as the people who are seeking to engage them, because now they know what they're dealing with. And there's a slightly different approach for each group.
I love that you lay that out so clearly. I hadn't thought about the different layers that are in there, and you do have to have a different approach for each group. And I love that you said something about you choose to humanize it rather than to demonize it. That's such an important value system of the conversations I'm having with people is that calling things out like toxic masculinity and really doing that sort of call out behavior. I think it has a place. It's brought some attention to some things, but I think real change happens when we actually can sit with each other and have a real conversation where there's psychological safety. And in order to do that, you have to humanize things rather than to villainize or to put more shame into the equation.
Exactly. Now, you just said something, you used the phrase call out, and then you talked about one-on-one. I call that calling in. And I just led a training yesterday. And one of the things I know about men is if you call out their behavior in front of a bunch of other people, they're going to go into shutdown. They're not going to hear it. Now, as a leader, you have a responsibility to create and maintain psychological safety. So if, for example, and this is the training I learned at the Mankind Project, if somebody comes from a historically marginalized group, you have to be their ally and you have to get them out of the line of fire. So if you have a guy being a jerk or saying things or doing things that are unsafe, you have to be willing to intervene right away and park it and do that. Now, if somebody's saying stuff or microaggressing, you're going to be more effective if you call them in. So I walked a couple of guys through how to do a call-in conversation yesterday. But first, I had to have them practice what happens when somebody says what you said landed on me. So I had them do a cleanup conversation so they could feel in their bodies, oh, I'm going to say to this person that I can see now that what I said or did angered, upset, made you sad. I'm sorry. Big one. I'm sorry that this happened to you while I'm driving the bus. And most importantly, I'm going to go back to my support accountability partner. I'm going to work on this so I do it less. So then they're able to call a guy in saying, hey, do you have a minute? I want to give you some feedback about what I saw. And then like, hey, are you aware that when you did this, that it landed, and I walked them through that. So there is an important distinction between call out and call in.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really grateful to hear that you have sort of a process that you walk men through around repair work when harm has been done. I think that it's such an important element that we don't really nobody's taught us how to do those skills. We've actually been taught to sort of like kind of disconnect from our impact to just move towards our goals and what we want and to achieve. From really early on as little boys, we started looking at people as obstacles or objects towards our goals. And so we didn't learn those repair work strategies. We didn't learn those abilities to make amends. And so I love that you have such a clear process for men to reflect on their own behavior and to actually step into real repair work rather than, I'm sorry, your feelings were hurt, and then moving on.
Yeah. See, in the Mankind Project, we have something called the clearing model, where someone could have said or done something that triggered you, and you're triggered. So you ask them to clear with you, which is another way of saying, hey, I've been triggered. Can you help me get clear about what's going on for me as a result of what you said or did? Now, the context of why we do this is to get back into right relationship with each other. So I share that because that sits there. We all want to be in right relationship with each other. Otherwise, why would we have a cleanup conversation? Mm-hmm. Just to be a better leader? That's all fine, but it's not enough.
Right.
Right. We want to be connected with each other. At least I do.
I think we're wired for connection, and yet some of our socialization as men disconnects us. And so, and I think that process is, as you're talking about that sort of external repair work, I know, at least in my journey, and it sounds like in your own journey, that calling self in, holding self accountable is just as important, and doing the repair work with our own selves, where we have stepped into versions that we've betrayed our own values, where we have disconnected from our impact on other people. Like, we also have to turn that inward too, that kind of self-leadership piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Say that again. Did you ask a question?
It wasn't really a question. It was just sort of a acknowledgement that it both moves outward, like that repair work, as we also have to learn how to do that skill inward. And I think being able to do that inwardly in our own relationship with self can help us even be better allies and better repair people on the outside too.
You said a word earlier, one of the 5 core feelings, and it's shame. Mm-hmm. And men, shame is a big issue for men. And what I offer, especially in being a better man and being a better ally and being a better inclusionary leader, to understand the distinction between healthy shame and toxic shame. And the reason why it's important to understand those distinctions is because by deciding to be a better man, by deciding to be an ally or inclusionary leader, you're going to fuck up. And you could be a well-intentioned man and still screw up. And what's going to define you is what you do after the screw up. And in that moment, in that millisecond, you can either club yourself and say, I'm a bad person, toxic shame. Or you can say, healthy shame, I'm a good human and I made a mistake. So how do I clean this up?
Yes.
And then you get back on the horse and you keep going. That's what I do.
It's funny you use the metaphor of getting back on the horse because it's my favorite work that I do. I do a version of coaching that involves horses. And one of my favorite things to do is help men reflect on the difference between their intention and their impact. And so, as you were saying, you can be a well-intentioned man and you're still going to screw it up. And when you're engaging with an animal with a flighty nervous system, and there's not that human element, that storytelling element that happens with us in our interpersonal dynamics, you get to start reflecting on what is my intention that I'm bringing into, and then what is the impact that's having, and is it actually getting me to where I want, which might be connection. And if it's not, what are some new strategies that will actually align your intention and impact? And so you use that metaphor, and it's just exactly what I was thinking. It was like, this is my favorite kind of work to do with men, is to bring them out into relationship, into their bodies, and experience something that helps them reflect on that.
Yeah. So the third step of the ally's journey that I mentioned before, take responsibility for my unexamined privilege and bias, and when necessary, clean it up. That opens up the door to explore and understand intention versus impact. And I used a phrase earlier about centering. And one of the things I'll do, I'll say to guys, listen, if you messed up and someone brings to your attention, the last thing they want to hear is that you didn't mean it. And I'll ask him, do you know why? And they're like, no. And I said, because you've centered yourself and you've made it about you. And then I say, what message does that send to them? That you don't give a shit. That it's just about you. So it's like, this is a big no-no. Bite your tongue. Your intention is irrelevant for the moment. Their experience is everything. Right? So I just wanted to put that in there.
I appreciate that, because I think that's a really advanced skill to be able to do, to be able to put down the ego, to put down the self-centering, and to be able to actually be in someone else's experience. And I think we as men really struggle doing that, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, being able to experience and validate someone's experience, even if it's different than our own. We actually often feel way more safe if we have sameness rather than differences. And how do we continue doing our own work so that there can be lots of different experiences out there? Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the things where we started our conversation, where we were both sort of surprised about our exploration of gay male, straight male relationships, I also wanted to call out a part of the book that I really appreciate you bringing in there, is the chapter that sort of centers voices that are often left out of this conversation on masculinity. Tell me a little bit about that chapter and why it was important for you to put it in there.
So, at the end of the book, there's an interview with Mike Kaufman, who's the CEO of Cardinal Health. And I was talking to him about the book, and he asked me, he said, so are you going to talk to men other than white guys? And I'm like, yeah. And it just, for some reason, while I had been thinking about it, I just didn't know where and how I was going to do it. And he just said, you should talk to some other men from in different classifications, if you will, because the other man I was speaking to at the end of the book was DK Bartley, the chief diversity officer of Moody's, who's a black man who's a gay man. And I said, we've had all these different guests on our conferences. Sean Coleman is a black trans man. Chun from Pinterest is a gay Asian man. Tom Bowden, former CDO from Staples, white gay man. And then Corey Ponder, straight black man. So I'm like, you know what? I want to create this chapter called Too Often Excluded Voices of Masculinity, ask them their views on masculinity, and then ask them if they have any guidance. What is it that they want the reader to know? And the point behind that is I wasn't just writing this book for white guys. I wanted other men who identify differently to see themselves in the book. So that's why I wrote that chapter.
I appreciate you doing that, because in my experience being a gay man and being really interested in men's work and masculinity work, when I'm reading books on masculinity, I'm often not seeing myself, not feeling myself in that writing. There's like really narrow bands and narrow archetypes that are used that represent oftentimes the same old power structures that we're kind of trying to undo. And so I appreciate you putting some emphasis on that and creating a whole chapter on it, because that allows more of us to come to the table, and more of us to be activated. Sometimes it can feel scary to step into that allyship when we have our own parts of ourselves that feel marginalized, or the intersections of ourselves that feel like they are marginalized. While I am a white male with privilege, I also have this part of me that feels disenfranchised and feels lost and like a scared little boy sometimes in the world. Yeah. And so being able to see all of my experience in in those chapters is really helpful. What was the biggest thing you learned from interviewing all of those men for the book?
It's a good question, which buys me a few more seconds to answer. The biggest thing that I learned, I remember it hit me when I was talking to Corey Ponder about what is it that he wanted me to understand. And when he said, Ray, all those times I've had to make adjustments so as to not trigger other people. The effort required to do that, I would want you to bring to attention to people that look like you, to step into that required effort to get out of your bubble. This is me paraphrasing, to be a good ally and leader. Because work's work, but his work was to, dare I say, come to the rescue of white folk. Mm-hmm. His invitation for me was to use that effort, that work, to advocate for people that don't look or identify like me, and to use it directly with those that look like me, right? And to encourage other people to do the same.
Sounds like one of those moments we were talking about sort of being called in. And
that's right.
In learning, like you had the beautiful gift and invitation of being called in to explore other forms, and you got to see the effort that many of us are putting in all the time. And that's what I was sort of meaning about how often the women in our lives, or queer people or people of color, are doing so much emotional labor for the collective, because we are all doing that. We are all trying to figure out ways to stay safe in our identities and live and accept ourselves, but then navigate really challenging power dynamics and structures that are not set up necessarily for us to succeed within. So I appreciate that you taking that call in and that invitation and actually really applying it here.
Thank you. And just like when I coached a woman on my team to do a video for the training, I knew the phrase, the two words that I needed her to be able to say for them to hear. When she spoke her own version of the emotional labor and how she has to do, she looked in the camera and she's like, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Uh-huh. So when I heard her say that, I'm like, my body went like, oh. I empathized. I was tired. So I get it. Now I have a different kind of exhaustion, but maybe it's similar because I'm the white cisgendered guy banging the drum, ding, 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 for like all these years. Talk to the hand. Mm-hmm. Or even like this year, I came into the year going, I'm afraid that my book launch is I'm gonna lose my life. there's going to be, I'm going to have all this business, right? Or that nothing's going to happen. Well, neither of the one happened. It's like there was Omicron crickets and burnout. And so all the people that I mean, it's still happening, weren't returning my calls. I had good relationships with them. But then these new companies would call me up, set up, and we close a piece of business. And they'd have the same look on the Zoom camera. Tell me what to do, Ray. And so I thought that this year would be easier. Now, there's been a turn of events where some things have come easier, but it's still exhausting. But it's a different kind of exhaustion. It's an exhaustion that I signed up for.
Yeah.
That my privilege allows that I could hit the eject button if I want.
Yeah.
I could.
You have choice over your exhaustion.
I have choice. You don't.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate you being able to see that and to acknowledge that.
Oh, totally. As I was saying it, I'm like, Ray, can you see that you have the privilege to choose not to? Say it.
Say it.
I catch up with myself.
Yeah, call yourself in and hold yourself accountable. It's good.
You got it. You got it.
No, I appreciate that. And I really want to encourage other men to be doing that same work. And it's not easy work to be able to see something that you've never experienced and to actually feel that. But as you were describing, we do have the capability, like even our neurological system has mirror neurons that start to resonate with each other. And so when this woman says that it's exhausting and your whole body shifts into exhaustion with her, that is a natural thing that ability we have as human beings, is to feel the experience of someone else. If we are actually open to listening, to being curious about it. I think one of the things I loved you said earlier was asking the question you don't know the answer to. Like, we as men are trained to only ask the questions that we know the answer to, and to validate our truth over and over again. But if you actually are open to things that you don't know, you will feel someone else's experience and you'll be able to get it on another level. Yeah.
In the step, listen with empathy and compassion, and this is not in the book because it kind of came after. That's the nature of this work. It keeps evolving. I teach the distinction between listening from the head versus listening from the heart. Listening from the head's binary: right, wrong, invalidate, defend, blah, blah, blah. Listening from the heart requires me to center myself, slow down, get curious, ask questions, pay attention to what's going on for me, not make it about me. That's a skill that, regardless of how you identify, we can all benefit from.
So I think it's a necessary skill that and I can understand the challenge that it's not always easy to do that, but it's something that's necessary for us to evolve into much more sustainable ways of being with each other. There's so much conflict, so much brittleness, so much out there. And one of the things I've been talking a lot with my clients recently about is how it's pretty hard to be human right now. It's a lot going on right now. And I think we have to be able to find ways to reconnect again and to connect in safer ways that don't have so much fraughtness involved in them. And I think that this is one of the processes of doing it, that we get to call each other in to do that work, to decenter ourselves, to watch what's coming up for us, to listen with curiosity, listen from the heart rather than through the mind, and to look for things other than what already validates our already current beliefs and truths. Like, look for other things that are out there. Look for the gray area.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Better Man Conference, the next one is November. Is that correct?
Yeah, November 2nd.
November 2nd.
And if your listeners go to www.bettermanconference.com, they can sign up for the newsletter. We're sending out blogs occasionally. So it's a good way to join our community. We won't inundate you. We'll keep you informed. So that's one thing. And then if you're interested, based on listening today, around the book, here's a deal that you may want to consider. Go to showingupbook.com, and when you buy the book, there's a way to register for you to get a free virtual ticket to the Better Man Conference. $99 value. How can you beat that, right?
How can you beat that?
Let's make a deal.
You get the book and you get to come to the conference. I love it.
That's right. Exactly. And so there's that. And then if any of your readers, hold positions of leadership in companies, especially if you identify as a man, or if you know a man who would be interested in this. Go to rayarata.com, reach out to me. We're looking for sponsors. And one of the things that we see that works really, really well is companies send delegations, 5, 10, 15, 20 men to the conference. If you're a little further along and you want to showcase what you're doing, I have a couple panel spots to talk about, and we can talk about what sponsorship could look like. So that's a lot of different options to interact.
Yeah, I can't recommend enough getting more men and more organizations to be coming to this stuff. We got to really de-bro the corporate culture and de-patriarch, at least in the way that it's currently set up, the way that it's going, because it's not sustainable. It's harmful in many ways.
Yes.
So I cannot encourage people to get curious and get interested in the work that you're doing at the Better Man Conference. So as we wrap up this conversation, I'd love to give you just one last little chance to kind of explain your perspective. If you were going to leave men with one piece of advice or an offering, what might that be?
So it would be less of an offering and more of a rhetorical question for you all to sit in. And that is, in light of the fact that the spotlight is currently on the majority men, the question I want you all to sit with is, do you want to be part of the majority that allows the bad apples, the minority that's currently controlling the narrative, to continue to do so? Or do you want to be part of the majority that galvanizes, that steps into your heart, that puts yourself on the path of being an allyship, being an ally and an inclusionary leader to affect the change that everyone needs, including you? That would be my invitation to consider that. And if so, then everything I said earlier around the book, the conference, anything else, it'll reveal itself to you what your next steps are.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I think some people are going to find that a really easy one to, well, obviously, I'm going to choose the latter. Of course, I'm going to choose that. And to recognize that there will be work, there will be discomfort, it will feel scary sometimes, but it's worth it. And you can do it in community. You don't have to do it alone, I think is one of the things.
That's right. Talk's cheap. So if you commit to walking the walk, your stuff's going to come up, and you don't have to do it alone. So that would be my little push.
Yeah. Yeah. I love a little push. Some of us need it. I'm one of those guys that needs a little push sometimes. So I appreciate that. So you've already kind of given a little bit of your website information, but how are people going to connect with you or find your book out there in the world if they're searching for you?
They can you can type in Ray Arata showing up in Amazon, boom, it'll show up. And my book, Wake Up, Man Up, Step Up's there if you want something more rudimentary around men's work outside of the corporate context. And, if you want to have a conversation with me around coaching, you can send an email to ray@bettermanconference.com. Or if you want to, based on what you heard today, you want to explore more.
So you're still doing one-on-one coaching with men as well?
Yes, I have a thriving coaching practice.
Wonderful.
It's an integrative coaching practice. I work with leaders, entrepreneurs, men and women, and I think I have like one or two spots left. Yeah,
I love it.
It's not for the faint-hearted.
No, it's not. And I love that even still at the sort of place of success that you're in and the big work that you're doing in terms of the macro level shifts that you're creating, that you're also making space to be in direct practice with people, in the trenches with people. I think that's a really important thing to be able to stay connected to.
It's huge.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if people want to get in connection with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can find me on Instagram at traver03, or you can email me directly at travisstock03@gmail.com. I'm also on Patreon, so if you're enjoying the mission of the New Masculine and you want to become a supporter, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. That's patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Really want to thank you, Ray, for joining me, for being a part of this with me. I've really enjoyed our conversation and watching the twists and turns of where it went that neither of us expected. So I appreciate you being here, appreciate the work you're doing, and I wish you the best of luck in this new conference in November.
Thanks so much, Travis. Have a great day.